My name is Joyce Chow. I'm Director of Asia Pacific based in Hong Kong. And it's my 12th time to join our annual event, quite significant to me. It's my pleasure to chair the panel today. Without further ado, I would like to welcome our panelists first. First of all, Mr. Maximilian Potler, Head of Labor Mobility, Head of Labor Mobility and Social Inclusion from IOM. Thank you. And we have Phoebe Evin, and she is not just our Human Rights Manager from Woolworth, but also Board of Directors of amfori. And last but not least, my colleague from Bangladesh, Network Representative Saiful Milad. Thank you. Yeah, and I think it is very important a topic. We chose the topic vulnerable workers in Asia going beyond mandatory compliance because we believe the protection of migrants workers' rights shouldn't be driven by legal requirement. We should go beyond that. It is the basic requirement for all. And I think there have been a lot have been said in different panels, might have a relevant information related to this topic anyway. But today we do have some focus. So before we start, I just want to quote some information about this topic with you. Obviously, the challenge of migration in Asia can only be tackled through the cooperation of governments and business and also multi-stakeholders. Without collaboration, it can't be done. And business, however, do carry the heaviest responsibility to implement rules and regulation and best practices to ensure we build a decent workplace for all across the global supply chains. And why we choose Asia? Because if we look at IOM's study, and they have a statistic quoted, out of 164 million migrant workers globally, 15% is coming from South and Southeast Asia. And among them, 19 million are male workers and 4 million are female workers. Migrant workers contribute a lot. They are the heart of our regional trade in this particular region. And they contribute a lot for GDP. According to some statistics, it shows that in South Asia only, the contribution of the remittances sent by the migrant workers back to their home country is equivalent from 6% to 30% of the GDP. Their rights must be protected. They contribute a lot, not only for their home country, but also the trade that we benefit many people in other parts of the world. So before we start, I would like to ask you 2 questions. Can you show the famous QR code? The first question is, how many of you are foreign members? I assume, or you know the BSCR requirement. So according to your understanding, BSCR requirement, have you come across any non-compliances related to migrant workers' protection in Asia? Yes or no? Very straightforward question. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. So we only have 24 members here. Those who didn't answer? Okay, still counting. Oh, I got additional time. That's good. Thank you, Elsa. She promised me to add additional time. Yeah. Okay. Ta-da. So we have 32. So the second question is about if we need you to just choose one from your understanding or your experience, which is the top concern of non-conformity or non-compliances in migrant workers' protection in Asian supply chain? Okay. I ask these questions because later in our discussion, we will get an overview and the perspectives from UN, IOM, our members, and also our team's observation. See whether we are aligned. Thank you. So recruitment fee, yes. Personally, I handle multiple zero-tolerance cases related to recruitment fee in Asia. Yes, indeed. Thank you. It fits, match with our common understanding. Thank you for your contribution of the input. That means you are not sleeping. Now, let's go to discussion directly. In order to have a better discussion as sharing, I decided to nominate myself to ask questions first, and I will group 2 questions for each of you in one go, and then the sharing will be more systematic, I would consider. So IOM actually started our relationship since 2016. We have signed 2 times the global MOU, and we have been working closely with their regional team. Mac's team based in Vietnam, Bangkok, have been closely working with us, and I have the honor always been invited to join your consultation of various issues related to forced migrant workers in countries like Indonesia, Thailand, or say Malaysia, for example. We work closely with the team. So today, Max, thank you. Because of your interim assignment, you usually are in Asia, and save our travel costs to sponsor you to come from Switzerland. Max, from the perspective of IOM, can you share with us what are the current top concerns of, say, migrant workers' protection in Asia? And are there any programs that your team has been offering to address those, say, challenges or concerns in the region? Yeah, that would be very interesting for our members to know. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Joyce, once again, for the invite, and also to amfori for providing IOM once again with an opportunity to bring the topic of migration a bit more on the agenda. And was very pleased to hear throughout the 2 days now that migration recruitment, in particular recruitment fees and other aspects, also migrants in situation of crisis, is coming through in the discussions here with what we at UN consider a private sector platform. IOM, perhaps, as we are speaking to the private sector, I think it's worthwhile still to introduce the organization, but perhaps I can get a quick show of hands from the audience. Who is familiar with the IOM, what IOM stands for and what IOM works on? Okay, that's more or less what we usually getting when we meet with the private sector. So it's always a little bit interesting to see how we introduce our work in the topic of migration to an external audience. So IOM is essentially the United Nations agency working on migration. We operate, and really the emphasis on operate under the umbrella of the United Nations and tackle all kinds of migration issues and challenges around the world. Of course, at the core of the IOM is that migration is a positive force for sustainable development. There are several goals within the SDG agenda where migration is recognized as something positive. It promotes sustainable development in destination countries, even in countries of transit and also in countries of origin. Perhaps something that we sometimes tend to forget a little bit when we talk about migration, including here in Europe, as I can see from the news. Of course, working on migration at the moment within IOM also means we are working on a number of crises around the world, in all of the regions. So while we promote the development that comes with migration, of course, a lot of our work is also humanitarian and response to several ongoing emergencies. IOM is very operational. It mainly responds to the requests of our member states. We have more than 170 member states around the world, on all continents. We have offices in more than 100 countries. So we have boots on the ground and more than 500 offices. At some point in Indonesia, for example, we had 20 offices across the islands in order to be able to assist victims of trafficking and irregular migrants there. And we have more than 20,000 staff. So perhaps comparable a little bit also with some of the amfori members in our size, but nonetheless we are non-for-profit. Joyce, you mentioned it very well. We have 280 million migrants around the world, and 170 million roughly move for employment, for work. So more than 60% of the migrants are migrant workers. That explains why IOM increasingly is interested in engaging with the private sector. We do this at all kinds of levels. Of course, in our offices in the country, I'm sitting with the IOM office in Thailand, by the way. I had the labor migration team there. Should have said that in the beginning. So in Thailand or at the local level, we work with employers' confederations. No? Even with small, medium-sized enterprises at the local level, we work a lot at IOM with recruitment agencies. So that's an actor that has been mentioned a few times. We work at the international level, industry groups or trade associations like amfori, but others, the Responsible Business Alliance, for example, the Consumer Goods Forum that were mentioned, are a very critical partner for us because we do see that in order to work meaningfully with the private sector, we need collective action, harmonized approaches. No, otherwise the issues are too fragmented and too big. You mentioned rightfully, with amfori we have a global cooperation agreement since 2017, and we're hoping to discuss the second version of it. No, the focus has been much on recruitment and ethical recruitment. IOM has developed a standard for ethical recruitment that has, I believe, been embedded now into the BSEI standard framework and is now being rolled out, as we could see in some of the panels. But coming to your first question, you already gave an overview, Joyce, on the flows of migration, the realities of migration in Asia in terms of numbers. It's really the region around the world that still stands out in terms of mobility. We have 10 million migrant workers within Southeast Asia, the ASEAN region, so mainly Thailand, Malaysia, and Singapore are the destination countries here. But we also have more than 20 million migrant workers from Asia going to other regions, primarily the Gulf countries, increasingly also to aging societies, aging labor markets, such as in Japan and Korea. But also we see an increasing interest from other regions, the European Union, countries like Australia, that also look for temporary migrant workers to be recruited. I'm recognizing it's a little bit late in the day now, so I'm very grateful for the attention, but I'm taking a little bit of a risk. So when talking about the challenges on migrant workers, I would like to explain a little bit, and I hope you bear with me, the way how migration, particularly in Asia, is managed by the states, by the governments. Most of our discussions here have been on private sector practices, frameworks, but I think in order to understand the challenges on migration, and the situation of concerning the rights of migrant workers, it's important to understand a little bit how migration works. So in Asia, migration is very large scale, and it is managed in a way that is temporary. Right? We used to have in Europe also these temporary guest worker programs, for example, in Germany, where the destination country decided it is beneficial for the labor market, so we bring in these migrant workers, but only for a limited amount of time. So this temporariness, if you imagine you would be a temporary worker, really affects the conditions of the migrant workers in many ways. The second point is your work permit as a temporary migrant worker is tied to one employer. Right? So you are, in a way, limited in terms of mobility and participation in the job market. You're quite dependent on your employer. And you may have seen this in the context of the World Cup in Qatar. Qatar has a very strict single employer permit system, and also migrants often have to leave if there is a problem, have to leave the country if there's a problem with the employer. Perhaps also quite interesting is that migrant workers are workers. No, they cannot come to the destination country and bring their families. They cannot bring their wives or their children. They have to stay behind in the country of origin. Was a bit similar, I think, also in Europe at the time when there's a quote, I think, from Max Frisch, who said, "We asked for workers, but human beings came." Most of these arrangements between countries of origin and destination are managed by soft memoranda of understanding between the countries of origin. So these are not legally binding, but there is an arrangement between a country of origin and destination to regulate those labor migration flows. But very often they're not transparent in the way how they're consulted with the social partners. They're sometimes not publicly accessible. And often they miss provisions speaking to the human rights conditions of the migrant workers. Now, when we look at the labor laws in country, there is also a number of gaps that we see that we also believe impact the rights conditions or the vulnerabilities of migrant workers in country. Just to name a few, this is not a comprehensive list. Migrant workers mostly can join a trade union, but they're not able to form or hold an office, right? So a migrant worker in a destination country can never represent another migrant worker. Migrant workers have often restricted movement. So every 30, 60, 90 days you have to report to a local labor office that you're still present in the province where your work permit is located. There are restrictions regarding to social protection benefits. You cannot bring back home your pension insurance requirements. As I mentioned, employers cannot be changed. In many countries, it requires the consent of the employer in order to find a new employment, right? And very often that puts the migrant worker also in a situation of dependency. We see that even though migrant workers in theory can open bank accounts, for example, in Thailand, this is often not the case. Migrant workers need to provide many more documentations than local workers and end up not having a bank account or access to financial services. Recruitment fees and costs, I think that once again showed as one of the key issues. So here perhaps important to note that recruitment fees and costs in Asia, but all around the world, can still be legally charged to migrant workers. Right? So that is a big problem also for ensuring compliance against an international standard that says no recruitment fees and costs can be charged to migrant workers if the laws in country, including in the countries of origin and destination country, allow for fees to be charged. The problem is often then on top of that they're also excessive. Perhaps also to mention that there are also restrictive rules regarding to gender. In some countries of origin, women require the consent either of their parents or their spouse in order to get the permission to go abroad and work. So that's the rule in some of the countries of origin. But we also see, for example, in a country like Malaysia, where requirements are very specific to sector, where Indonesian women are allowed to work in factories, but Indonesian men can only work on construction sites and in the palm oil plantations. Now, linking to that just very briefly, that sort of fairly restrictive system of migration governance and restricted or limited freedoms and rights of migrant workers then sometimes is met by a lack of rule of law, right? The laws that exist, particularly when it comes to recruitment, for example, is not properly enforced, and we do see risks of corruption, also again linked to, for example, recruitment fees and costs. So that was the first challenge that I wanted to mention. The second one, I stay a bit more brief. Yeah, very important, and perhaps something from IOM that we would like to bring a bit more to your attention and into the agenda is that because of the temporariness of migrant workers and the way how work permits are being issued, there's a high risk, and we see that particularly in Thailand, for migrants to arrive in a destination country without documentation, and that means without the legal right to work. In Thailand, we estimate that more or less 70% of the migrant workers coming from Myanmar, from Cambodia or from Laos arrive without proper documentation. No? And of course there is clear evidence that workers that do not have the legal right to work in that country are even more vulnerable and at higher risk of other exploitations. And of course it's harder for them to access any grievance channels, no? Because there's a high fear in terms of being caught, being deported or being dismissed. And of course, you can also fall irregular as a migrant worker. For example, if the employer decides to report you as someone who has run away from the workplace. And the third point that, just very briefly, also links to the previous panel, migrant workers are at the front line when it comes to crisis. Both as responders during COVID-19, we know migrant workers have continue to work in the agricultural sector, linked to food security, but also in health and care sectors. At the same time, migrant workers are most vulnerable in a situation of crisis. So these three factors I wanted to highlight that show, I think, that there's really a high-risk environment, including for the private sector, when it comes to upholding and securing the rights of migrant workers. But at the same time, perhaps very important also to say, migrant workers are still moving, still going, so they're also resilient. No? You mentioned that in Nepal, for example, the GDP, the remittances sent by migrant workers account for 25%. In Thailand, destination country, for 10%. Two sentences on IOM's work. So we are, of course, trying to address all of these challenges to a large extent with the governments. We are working on a project that we used to call CREST, Corporate Responsibility in Eliminating Slavery and Trafficking in Asia, which we, starting from 2024, will rename as Migration, Business and Human Rights in Asia. We want to align a bit more with the UN Guiding Principles on business of human rights. We'll be working with the government, inviting private sector to have dialogue, to remove some of these discriminations that we have in the laws. We'll work with the private sector, hopefully including with amfori and the members, to translate a bit more into practice what human rights due diligence means in the context of labor migration. And one important topic, of course, will be also the access to remedy and the collaboration with the civil society, especially migrant-led organizations that we have in all of the countries in Asia.
Thank you. I hate to be the moderator. I have to cut you off. Yeah? Thank you. But thank you for all the very important information. IOM's team actually offer free training for brands and, say, business partners. And I do have all those information available if you like. And I will prepare a list of information that you can participate in their online free training, learning more about how they can, their tools can support you to monitor the risk in the supply chain, especially those related to migrants. The other thing is they on and off also invite amfori to nominate members to join the discussion consultation regarding different issues in Asian countries. So the fisheries industry is high risk. I have been informed many times. So I hope in the future, don't reject my email if I invite you. Yeah, thank you. Sorry, Max, I have to stop you here. And now our lady panelists and board member and also important member, Woolworths team know migrant workers recruitment fee very well because I have been working with your team from Shanghai and covering multiple cases. Very, very excellent job, best practices. I hope today Phoebe can quote some of the examples. So my question to you is start with what is your corporate strategy to address, say, the protection of migrant workers? What are the challenges you face in Asia? Can you name one or two cases that you successfully help them to improve, remediate, and then perform better? Thank you, Phoebe.
Thank you, thanks. So hi everyone, just to clear up a misconception, I am Human Rights Manager for Woolworths Group, which is Australia's largest retailer, not Woolworths Germany, who are here in the room today. If you disagree with anything I have to say, please don't go and attack poor Sebastian from Woolworths Germany. He doesn't deserve it. So I am typically based out of Hong Kong, and I manage the human rights for our Asia-based supply chains. So we import into Australia and New Zealand, and we're primarily looking here at food and supermarket type products. So back in 2021, we made our first ever public disclosure of modern slavery. During a routine social compliance audit, we found some non-conformances with a Malaysian-based supplier. To follow this up, we conducted a deeper dive forced labor specific audit. And through that process, we identified 6 out of the 11 indicators of forced labor as per the ILO at this one site in Malaysia. So a lot of these indicators were really tied into the recruitment process. We heard a lot of really good stuff yesterday about kind of remediating these issues in Malaysia, and it rings true, right? So the workers are being charged very, very high fees in their home countries, primarily Nepal. They were being exploited through that recruitment process. Their passports were being taken off them by the agencies. There are a lot of red flags here, and in a lot of cases, workers here were paying thousands of US dollars in fees to get a job in a factory. So I'm not going to go on about this for too much longer because I want to share a lot about the challenges that we faced, of which there were many. But we partnered with a local NGO, we worked with Amfori, and we were able to facilitate the repayment of around just under $500,000 to the workers in Malaysia. And we developed through this process a really close working relationship with the supplier. We now work with them to pilot some really cool stuff. We're working with them in Nepal to look at how to validate recruitment agencies and uplift the good guys, the good actors in that space. And we're working with them on some other worker voice projects as well. So for us, you know, this is a really great example. However, I'm not just going to sit here right now, pat ourselves on the back and say, hey, look at us, look how great we are. Because to be frank, that's one case. And we know that recruitment issues, recruitment fees, violations of human rights run deep through a lot of Asia supply chains. So I kind of want to spend the majority of my remaining few minutes to share a little bit about our kind of learnings and some of the challenges that we face operating in human rights in Asia. First, in terms of learnings, and I cannot stress this enough, go and visit your suppliers. If you have suppliers in Asia, get on a plane, go knock on their door, visit their factories, and sit down and actually speak to them. I have a horrible example, but it's something that's really on the top of my mind because it just happened to me 3 weeks ago. I joined a routine, just a kind of like a scoping visit. We went out to Indonesia. We're just kind of getting the lay of the land, understanding what the industry looks like out there, visiting a few factories, not our own suppliers, but just kind of could be potential suppliers in the future. I kind of tagged along just to learn primarily, actually. That was my main purpose here. Now, this factory that we went to go visit on paper looked great. There was no cause for concern, kind of interested to go see it because it was quite a long drive out of the capital city. When we got there, the human rights violations, there were many. We were walking around the factory, I counted something like 10 just open elevator shafts, right? That workers could very easily have fallen down, gotten hit on the head from these, I mean, I call them elevators. They're like boxes on bits of rope with a hook. No access to first aid, no access to proper firefighting equipment. The factory itself was run down, dirty, and just dangerous. We then went to the medical room to speak to the doctor, who is kind of part of the facility. And he explained to me that when workers join the factory, they do a health check. And, you know, that's fairly normal in a lot of Asian countries. He then explained to me the types of checks that he does on these workers. Majority of these workers are female, by the way. Every single female worker, before they sign their contract, has to undergo pregnancy testing. And these workers were not given long contracts. Their contracts were 3 months long before they need to renew. So that means that every single female worker is undergoing pregnancy testing every 3 months in this factory. And he told me this like, oh, isn't it great? Because then we can avoid pregnant women being around. It is almost laughable. And then they took me to the canteen and they showed me the hatch where the HR manager facilitates the loan paperwork for the workers. So again, when the workers join the factory, they're given a loan to, quote, manage their living expenses because they don't make very much money. They're given a loan and they work to pay it off over the course of their employment. Now, when I asked what happens if a worker wants to leave employment, they said, oh no, they can't because they have the loan, so it's great, they stay for much longer. So this was, I mean, a perfect case study, but a really, really horrendous situation to be witness to. And I wanted to share this because, I mean, it's been playing on my mind, but I also think it's just such a good case to show the importance of going and talking to your suppliers and seeing those factories. And in the same breath, I may be looking at a supplier on a piece of paper and think, oh my goodness, so many non-conformances, this is going to be a nightmare. I hate my job. Why do I have to have these conversations? And I'll go to the factory and I'll sit down and meet some of the coolest, like most engaged, passionate people about human rights that I've ever met. All they need is a bit of guidance and maybe just a little bit of a plan, you know? So that's probably the biggest kind of learning I have here. I don't know how many more minutes I have left to rant on. 2 more minutes, okay, cool. So in 2 minutes, I will just... Three, okay, excellent. I will summarize the challenges in Asia. So I was thinking about this last night. I was kind of putting my thoughts down, and trying to summarize the challenges in Asia is really, really hard. I have a long list. We have civil war. We have some really intense geopolitical situations. We have very large countries with a lot of internal migration, but in the same breath, we have countries with a lot of international migration, each of those corridors carrying their own challenges. We have restrictions on freedom of speech, right? You can't sit in a forum like this in some places in Asia and have a conversation about human rights. It's just a whole different ballgame. There's a lot of elephants that walk into the room when you start to talk about human rights in Asia. We have language barriers, we have clashes in culture, clashes in even how we define human rights. We have different laws, as Max mentioned very, very well. We have authoritarian governments, natural disasters. The list goes on. So the picture I'm trying to paint here is it's a very, very challenging part of the world to be operating in. There are a lot of great opportunities, and we really, really support good migration and good practices when it comes to responsible recruitment. We really, really value our relationships with our Asia-based suppliers, but as I mentioned, we have to go beyond that base level due diligence in a lot of these countries, develop trusted relationships, go out there, visit the suppliers, see what's really happening on the ground. This cannot be more true even after COVID, as things have changed. I think I'll stop there.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Joe.
Because our session actually is unfair to us. We have 10 minutes less than others. Thank you for being cooperative. Okay, but we can have chance to come back. Thank you, Phoebe. I just want to make sure Milad also share some of his views, and then we can come back with some follow-up questions. Thank you. So Milad, I cut the original question shorter. We don't need to repeat those challenges already, but maybe you can go direct. What have you, being amfori's representatives on the ground, support, what have we done to support our members to address some of the challenges? Speak for Change, for example, and different programs, capacity building for producers, and maybe you can name some of those examples. And the second part is, I know migrant workers are vulnerable, especially women migrant workers, and you can quote some programs you have been doing on the ground so that members know how amfori support them to address the migrant workers' needs. Thank you.
Thank you, Jess. Good afternoon, everybody. Before I go on, looks like I have two part of the question. One is my experiences and how amfori has helped in terms of migrant workers and all. I'll start with a quote from Al Sharpton, the civil rights activist from USA, probably. You might know him. Next time you hear about migrant children near the border, just picture them as your own. Then think what you want the government to do. Coming back to the original question, first part, how amfori helps. And thanks for saving the time of not telling about the NC's non-conformities anymore. You people have already covered very well, exploitation, middleman recruitment. I found a very interesting one when I was speaking to some of the members present here, some of the stakeholders, one of the business partner as well, who gave me a very interesting perspective, which I must include here before I go on to your question, Joyce, about the recruitment fee. And also there is a strange thing called conversion rate to play around with, you know, like you tell the migrant worker you'll pay them in US dollar, 20, 30, whatever, and then you cheat them or exploit them with a lower rate or something, you know. Like there are so many other ways of indirectly influencing them or abusing. How amfori helps? I will request you to look at this brochure, you all might have seen maybe all that from the opposite, actually. Lena, thank you. On the back side, you will read, our members have the power to change the world, and we help them do that. So what we do in terms of amfori's activities and all, we do the training programs, the capacity building workshops, as you know them. The responsible purchasing practice is one of the very great thing, very timely thing that came in the COVID time, and we informed or requested all members to act responsibly, so that definitely comes into the consideration of migrant workers as well. And then the stakeholder engagement, like the multi-stakeholder forum that we arrange in different countries, in Bangladesh and in any other country, and the roundtable and other discussions. In terms of Speak for Change, you have observed, heard, you were here during Laura, our colleague, delivering the Speak for Change program in details. If you want to know more, in short, we say, we call it S4C. Speak for Change is a very unique and interesting program, piloted in Vietnam, rolled out in Turkey and Bangladesh, coming up in India very shortly. So we are very proud about this, and you will find lots of good reasons why Speak for Change is related to the topic that we are talking about here, vulnerable workers in Asia going beyond mandatory compliance. You know, like you, generally when you talk about living wage around the world, that is not mandatory when minimum wage is. So what are we doing in addition to the mandatory compliance or due diligence? Women empowerment project that we ran in Bangladesh, a Shobola project for 2.5 years. Similarly, other women empowerment projects in India and China as well, with a little bit different classroom training and all. But the Speak for Women Empowerment project called Shobola was a great success, and many of the members requested for us to replicate it or to do a phase 2 kind of thing. We are still talking to some of the members who are interested. One of the members was present here today, who is almost at the beginning of signing or talking to us at the initial level though. What were the learning from this Women Empowerment project, where the sensitization to be the biggest thing? Many male-dominant factory management staff are not interested to see women growing from worker level to supervisor to managerial level. So to sensitize them to develop the skill of the women as a supervisory or managerial level, and to give them other soft skills, for example, financial literacy, may not suffice the theme, the program, the initiative, you know. The men has to accept them like, yes, this is going to help me run my floor, run my production activity in a much better way if I have a next to me as a female supervisor. You know, they will understand it better, workers will feel much better and comfortable. The biggest thing about the Shobola project learning that we have, and the women empowerment activities that we run across, not only in Bangladesh, but in other countries, are the respect that women gain from that in the factory workplace, in their community as well. So we will talk about this more. If any of you are interested about Shobola and other things, we will be able to give you more details. I will stop here, Joyce, by saying again from the backside of the brochure, which says, join us and turn risks into opportunities. Am I done, Joyce? Do you have any more minute, or shall I stop here?
1 minute, please.
1 minute. Or are you going to come back later?
Okay. No, I wonder.
I
Okay,
think
yeah,
that's
because
it for now.
I see we are having 9 minutes behind, left. So I wonder whether in case teams have already received any questions, I want to know,
Sure.
and then
Good
to
enough.
address the questions would be also part of our responsibility.
Sure.
So I
Better that
was
way.
asking whether
problem.
we have already. No, then fine. Okay.
Questions, if there's any
Yeah.
questions in the room, raise your hands.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. Good. So any questions? Any questions before I supplement more information which we could not cover earlier? Any questions? Don't be shy. Yes, ladies? Thank you.
Thanks. Yeah, a question for Phoebe. The example you gave of the factory in Indonesia that you visited, you said it looked great on paper. I was wondering, in this context of vulnerable workers, when you review factories on paper, what information do you have and what do you look at?
Great question. So once we're working with a factory, we obviously have a lot more information on them. We actually, I'm accidentally plugging BSCI here, but we actually use BSCI as one of our kind of like standard level due diligence processes. So factories that we work with have to submit regular social audits, and BSCI is one of the standards we accept. And of course, we'd have information about their quality audit, we'd have information about site visits, and just generally kind of scorecards related to how they work with us. It's a lot different when you don't have that relationship with the factory. So in this case, we had really, really limited information. We had kind of an old social compliance audit. We had a little bit of quality data. But even the quality data was definitely so out of date because the factory in the pictures and the factory in real life were it was like falling apart. So yeah, it's limited. It's limited is what I'm trying to say. Hopefully that kind of answers your question.
Any follow-up one you want to add? No? Any other question? Two more, thank you.
Okay, I'll start. Thanks for the very insightful talk. I have a question to Maximilian, because earlier you mentioned that, or all of you, but earlier you mentioned that migrant workers are usually very hesitant to voice any concerns using grievance mechanisms, for example. So in the fear of getting deported, for example. So do you have any other suggestions how could one engage with those to actually, provide a way to voice any concerns?
Yeah. Thank you for the question. It's a good one. Yes, amfori perhaps will also have something to say on that. Perhaps from our perspective, if you look at the three pillars of the UN Guiding Principles, the protect, respect, and the remedy, the third one is often perceived as the hardest to solve, and I think, well, the UN Guiding Principles, of course, say it's a shared responsibility, between government and the private sector, and there are very specific barriers that are important when it comes to migrant workers. The simplest one is language, right? Is that channel actually accessible in language? Sometimes you have different dialects, even if we think of Myanmar migrant workers in Thailand, they often speak different languages. And it can be very complex barriers, such as the fear of deportation. Because as a temporary migrant worker, if your work permit is revoked, you just have to leave the country and you lose any access to that grievance channel. So I think the solution is not there yet in that sense, but we see pathways perhaps for the solution. What we do quite effectively in some of the countries in Asia is to work with the excellent civil society organizations that we have on the ground that can bridge when it comes, and some of the violations also do not or should not be addressed within a company operational or even industry grievance mechanisms. Some violations when it comes to migrant workers are so severe that it should go into the state system. And this is where civil society can really help if they have the trust of the migrant worker community to bring migrant workers to the local labor office. And in Thailand, we have supported one organization for half a year. We had $80,000 in wages and benefits repaid to migrant workers, and with relatively little money. So that was very encouraging. Of course, training, capacity building to state actors, be it inspectors or local labor offices, I think is also very important. And then continuing to work on operational level grievance mechanisms. In IOM, we have a guidance on that we can perhaps also share to making operational grievance mechanisms more migrant-centered. But then, of course, we do also recommend and support industry-wide or collective channels as well.
Yeah, there are several ways I can supplement. Because back in August, I was invited by IOM actually, having a meeting with some multiple governments in Asia. And they do have some very well-organized mechanism to support outgoing migrant workers. Even if they are facing challenges in country of destination, they do have a very good sophisticated migrant workers mechanism for grievances, such as the Nepalese government. And they have some website provided to us, and then we can browse through where can we find whom. And this is the official channel we can take reference of. The other kind of thing, of course, our Speak for Change program obviously is the choice, but we have to play humble because we are, compared with many other civil society, we come quite new, so we are collecting different references, programs in different countries where we can also leverage, because in the conventional way of communication, amfori members are buyers, retailers, and trading companies, and business partners are the direct employer. So now we are trying to also strengthening our capacity building program, say grievance mechanism training. Actually, it was introduced in and responsible recruitment training. We also quite well popular in different countries. In Asia, for example, we started in Thailand, funded by the Thai government, now replicated in multiple countries. Those are the good training to train the middle management of factories to be open-minded and to be systematic, professionally handle grievances. So those are our way to support how migrant workers can be protected when they want to air their grievances. We still have a few minutes left. Let's take 3 minutes and one more question. Yeah. Thank you. I don't want to go out with grievance, so please ask questions.
Thank you. Lee Esterhazen from Andweide. It's a comment related to Laura next to me. I think it's important to accept that, you know, most workers won't use a grievance mechanism necessarily. Some will, but many won't. And I think it's important to recognize with migrant workers that many, as Max and Laura and Phoebe have acknowledged, will feel daunted by needing to raise their hand and step forward. It'll feel too stigmatizing, too much pressure. And there are 3 preconditions for workers to kind of step forward and be ready to use a kind of a whistleblowing or helpline or grievance mechanism. The first is the cultural norm to complain and give feedback and have that feedback honored and respected. The second is the confidence to complain, the personal confidence to complain. And the third is the sense that there's nothing at stake. Very, very few workplaces have those 3 norms met. And so can we think creatively about how we can provide a channel for workers that doesn't place the burden on the worker? And I know, Phoebe, you mentioned worker voice in passing, but perhaps it's worth sharing more about that. Thank you.
Maybe just to comment back, I couldn't agree more with that point. The burden is so often placed on the worker to self-identify as a victim or as vulnerable, say, and I think this is something we could all be collectively doing so much better, is finding those channels and those means to connect with workers in a way that genuinely makes them feel like they have a voice. In so many different ways, we all, I feel, need to be doing that better. So I just value that comment. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, indeed, it's not a very complicated issue. It's not just one solution can resolve. But we are happy to collect different programs that we can leverage together. And cultural gap is, cultural adaptation is one of the key barriers when we implement a grievance mechanism in multiple countries. Due to time limitation, I have to very reluctantly to conclude here, but it doesn't mean we will end the conversation. Feel free to address your questions offline to us, and we are happy to answer. And actually, we have been closely working with our members, just like Woolworths team. Recruitment fee, we spend hours and hours of talk between the business partner in Malaysia, the team in Shanghai, and then we find a remediation plan to say gradually 100% pay back those missing of recruitment fee. So we have a lot can share with you offline those best practices. And our team in Hong Kong is not the only one. So I would like to leverage this opportunity to ask my team from Asia Pacific, Yolanda from China, Jill from China, Alan from China, Hong Kong and regional office, and also Muge and Natasha. India. So they are the one who can help you answer the questions and address your grievances on the ground directly. No need to wait once per year to come and listen to us. So you can reach out them, recognize their face, and then talk to them. And thank you very much, Max and Phoebe and Milad. I'm so sorry because of time limitation, we can't do all the discussion. Thank you for your attention. And